coming to sit down and having a conversation with me. So the people who are watching on TV too will know this is another edition of Front Porch Conversations, and I appreciate you being willing to be a part of it. This is Carole Rainsberger and Jim Rainsberger, and you live in River Woods?
Yes.
And on Live Oak, is that correct?
Correct.
Good. Tell me a little about yourselves, where you were born, early life experiences.
Okay. I was born in Michigan, and I was born in Lansing. Actually, Detroit. Moved to Lansing when I was just very young. And my parents and Jim's parents lived in close proximity. So when I was about 12 years old, we became good friends. And our families did things together, especially went to church together. His mother was my Sunday school teacher, and the Rainsberger family had children the same ages as my family. So it was a lot of fun when we did get together.
Jim, what about you?
Well, I was born and raised in Lansing. My mom and dad, dad was a grocer and became an accountant, and mom was a preacher at that time, and then she gave that up, and she also became an accountant. And then I was involved in youth group and so forth. And I remember our family broke off from the main church. We started a missionary church, and so we got part of that, and so we became charter members of the church that Carole and her family then came to. And so that Lansing was pretty much my home until actually my junior year of high school. After being involved in Youth for Christ and rallies and heading up the Bible Club program for my sophomore year, the Lord spoke to me during that, or because of that, and then at camp that summer, I had rededicated my life to the Lord. And I'd been saved at an early age, at 5 years old, and my parents led me to the Lord. So convicted me that I wanted to go get ready to be in God's service, and so ended up going to Prairie Bible Institute's Academy for my junior year of high school. And I don't know how my parents let me do that, but we did. And then because of the curriculum adjustments between the Canadian curriculum and the U.S. curriculum, I ended up coming back to Lansing for my senior year.
Well, you know, I say that everybody has something in common that you find if you just have a little conversation. And I remember my first conversation with you, Jim, was by phone before you moved here. And you were living in Lansing at the time. And I said, my son lives not far from where your address is. So I'm sure we'll discover more things, and other people will discover things about you today. So
yeah, the green and white for Michigan State.
That's right. And so you met in church.
Right.
And then it must be that you got married. So what happened in...
Yes. When I was in high school, I became very interested in what God's plan was for my life. And that actually started out when I was just a tot, having been born into a Christian family. At a very early age, I learned that God loved me and gave his son to die for me. And that changed my life. From that point on, my focus was pleasing God and searching for what God wanted in my life. So in high school, I became very interested in Moody Bible Institute, even before I realized that Jim was also interested in heading that direction. So I pursued that after high school and attended Moody Bible Institute, and it was during that time that Jim and I became engaged, and soon after he finished Moody, we married and made plans for serving the Lord overseas. Jim is a missionary pilot, and I would fit in wherever the needs were greatest for secretarial work or whatever. And so it was really exciting as we saw how God led us step by step in the direction that He wanted us to go. As I look back over the years, it just amazed me how God had specific plans for us, and that as we studied His Word and prayed, He directed us step by step. And it was really exciting at the time, and when I look back, I'm amazed at how He led us.
And that was interesting because when I came back from Prairie and back from my senior year of high school, the Lord used a film from Missionary Aviation Fellowship to convict me about what I should be doing. As a little kid, I'd always been interested in aviation and planes, and the World Book encyclopedias and their kids' books, where I always had this one story about an airplane, and I think I must have read it hundreds of times to go through that. But the Lord had spoken to me about that we were not our own, we've been bought with a price, and that we needed to glorify our Father which is in heaven. So that became a career goal for both of us, as it turned out, and what we were looking for, which changed to what we were looking for in a mate, and what our qualifications were, and then what we would do. And after seeing that film, why I was convicted that I should try to be a missionary pilot. So that was our first call. And so after graduation of high school, I had a choice of taking a scholarship to MSU or going to a flight camp, and I was selected to go to flight camp. So we got through all of the training of who was going to qualify to go in there, and I was amazed that the Lord got me in for that too. So like Carole said, Moody was 3 years of program at that time, and the aviation for the flying part was the 4th year. So you could get married after 3 years, and so we did. And then she helped me get me through school to get our final stuff. So I graduated then with all the technical ratings for private commercial flight. I got my instructor's certificate, and then I ended up with a seaplane rating, multi-engine ratings, and later on I ended up with an airline transport rating, so I got all my qualifications for that. So the next step, well, what do you do after all your training? Well, we were just young kids, and we didn't think so at the time, but the missions did, so we were trying to figure out whether we were going to go with Wycliffe Bible Translators or maybe Missionary Aviation Fellowship, and they both told us, well, go get some training. So we ended up in a business in Elkhart, Indiana. That's where our first daughter was born, in South Bend, Indiana, and then after a year and a half, I came back and was a flight instructor, charter pilot, and so forth in Lansing. And then we felt the Lord leading us to Wycliffe Bible Translators. So that entered into a whole bunch of different things that we didn't know what was happening. So we ended up being the first group of non-translator applicants who had the support course. And so we went to Norman, Oklahoma for the summer, but our support course was shortened, unfortunately. We didn't take as many linguistic courses. That proved to us I wasn't a linguist.
Jim, would you kind of mention just a brief description of Wycliffe for some of our viewers who may not be familiar with Wycliffe?
Sure. Wycliffe Bible Translators was started back in the 30s with Uncle Cameron Townsend, who went to Mexico as a Bible co-porter selling Bibles. And there were Spanish Bibles. And one day a Cachiquel Indian came up to him and looked at the Bible. He said, if your God is so great, why doesn't he speak my language? And that challenged him, so he actually went and began work amongst the Cachiquel, and he and his wife translated the Cachiquel language, translated the Bible into the Cachiquel language. And from that started the whole organization of beginning Wycliffe Bible Translators. So that's how it got us started.
And through the years, they translated many, many languages.
Right.
All over the world.
That's right. So right now, we think there's somewhere about 2,000 languages yet, and the goal for Wycliffe and all of its related groups, there's about 100 people or 100 organizations now that are involved in the Wycliffe Global Alliance, with all the goal of getting God's Word into every language by 2025. So that's the goal.
That's an ambitious goal.
It is.
So lots more people are needed to help do that. it
That's
sounds
right.
like.
Definitely.
Well, at this point, you've been married and you're starting to have children. Where did you all grow? Where did they grow up?
Okay, our first daughter was actually born in South Bend, Indiana, but when she was 3, we were expecting number 2, and so on Christmas Day of the year that our second child was born, we headed to South America, and the youngest was born in Cochabamba, Bolivia, and that was quite an experience. And when she was 6 weeks old, we had completed language study and headed to the jungle. And we flew in a cargo plane with all of our barrels. I think we had like 9 barrels of all of our earthly possessions, and made that trip to the jungle.
You need to understand where the jungle was on the banks of the Amazon River basin. We were actually on the river, on the Beni River, and that flowed into the Madre de Dios, which flowed on into the Amazon. And there wasn't much out there. So when we went out there on that trip, we didn't really understand all the things that were happening. And so when we realized how they got things off of a C-46, which was an old World War II cargo plane, but the ramp or the floor of the airplane was up about 12 feet from the ground. And so it was an interesting experience to watch them roll up an old used tire to underneath the door, and then they shoved all these 55-gallon barrels out and bounced them off the tire and then onto the ground. And so all of our, things like a sewing machine and other things, or your dishes that you're washing today, all went through that experience to arrive at our home in Bolivia. So we were on the banks of the river, and that's where Wycliffe had its base. And so the premise then, at that time, was to locate a base in cooperation with the government somewhere in the center where all the Indian languages and tribal peoples were located. So that's where we were. So the government had decided that we could go live at that location, and that's where it became the center then. And so that was where we as missionary pilots would fly out from there to all of the Indian locations in the villages. So I had a chance to be in all of them and see how God's Word was changing their lives and what was happening.
Well, when you described to me on our previous conversation, tell us about the airport where you first landed. Was that a loose term? Landing field?
Well, we left Miami, and it was on a DC-6, 4-engine and a prop plane, and we landed in Lima, Peru, which is a pretty progressive capital in Peru. From there, we went to Bolivia. And Bolivia, La Paz, was the highest commercial airport in the world at that time. It was about 13,000 feet. And so I'd been training pilots, I'd been chartering pilots, I'd been doing all kinds of things in our modern civilization in Michigan. And then at this point, we landed, and I looked out, and we weren't on concrete, we were on gravel. And there wasn't any landing lights alongside of the airport. They were all white painted rocks, and that was what delineated the airport when we got there. And I realized that I had really gone into a different location.
To put it mildly.
Yes, that's true.
Well, I understand that then there was another child. You had 3 children?
No, we have 2.
Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
2 girls.
So they both grew up for parts of their lives?
Yes, we lived on the jungle base while they were in their early years of grammar school. And it was an ideal place to raise a family. It was beautiful. We were right on a lake. it was far away from any cities and quite isolated. So the girls and I pretty much made our home right there at the base. And Daddy got to go on all these trips to the different villages, and only once or twice did we get to go out for that, unless we were going out for medical or vacation time. And our girls had a wonderful experience there. And then after several years there, then we went up to Cochabamba in the mountains, and they took schooling there in a mission school. But they were always with us, which was a real blessing to be able to have our children with us. And we stayed there then until the girls were ready for junior and senior high school. And it was time for us to go on furlough. We would go about every 3 years, we would take a 6 months furlough. Mm-hmm. So at that point then, we were reassigned to JARS in North Carolina. And we put the girls in school there to finish out their high school years there.
So for you, Jim, did that end your flying career?
Well, it's in our first year in Bolivia, when we were asked to, after our second year, we were asked to go to Ecuador to fill in a co-pilot spot on a DC-3. So Wycliffe operated one DC-3 at that time that had been donated to Wycliffe. And it was in Ecuador, and they were needing a co-pilot. I had all those ratings, and I was qualified to do that because I'd been doing a lot of multi-engine work. So we spent that was 1969 that we were up there, so I was co-pilot there. And I thought that they would agreed for us to come back and move into the captain's slot there. And but the team in Bolivia lost their pilot, so they needed me back in Bolivia, so we went back to Bolivia for our second term. And during that time, Bolivia decided to get a DC-3 as well. And so I was managing the small aircraft program, which we had 3 206s and some Helio couriers that we operated at that time. And then we put the DC-3 into operation there. And then for our third term, they asked me to come in and be captain on the DC-3 for our third term before we went back to the States. So because I was working with all of our people, we were actually flying trips out of the backside of the Andes up from Bolivia to Miami. We got a lot of experience that way, and I got a lot of experience in trying to get people there on the airlines to make those trips. So when we were ready to come home, like Carole said, I ended up starting the travel department for all of Wycliffe out of Waxhaw. So we grew that into a large operation in short order because all of our people were traveling. But we ended up saving our missionaries a lot of money by working through that kind of an arrangement. So my career as flying really kind of took a hiatus there. And then they asked me to manage, but at that time then we ended up with 3 DC-3s, one in Colombia, one in Bolivia, and one in Ecuador in order to handle all the transportation. So when we got to Waxhaw and then came out of the travel department, they asked me to manage all 3 of those airplanes. So I did that for a while until we got one back that finished its mission in Ecuador, and we're looking for a place to go with that one. So we did some looking around the world and where a DC-3 might be needed. We looked at China, so I had a trip to China in there to do that, and a trip around Africa to see where it might be possible to better meet the missionaries' needs in Africa. And ultimately, we partnered up with Africa Inland Mission, and we took the DC-3 based out of Nairobi and flew all over sub-Saharan Africa and meeting the different missionary needs there. And there was some interesting stories about that, too.
I bet. Well, it's interesting to me that you've shared that your daughters are still involved. Would you talk a little bit about that? Because I've heard people say, well, my parents became missionaries, but I didn't. Well, it sounds like yours did.
Yes, that actually was quite a surprise to us because even though we made it a point to make them feel a part of the ministry that we were involved in, we wanted them to know that God may have other plans for their lives, and that was fine. And but unbeknownst to us, the Lord had plans for them to pick up where one day we wouldn't be able to continue that work. And our hearts were in Bible translation to make sure that others who had never had a chance to hear God's word would be able to receive it in their own language. And so it was a real joy for us when we saw God's plan unfold in each of their lives, where they caught the vision for Bible translation, and they met young fellows who were also interested in missions and in taking God's word to the ends of the earth. And so, first of all, our oldest daughter met a young man at Columbia International University in South Carolina. And they met the first week, and he wanted to be a Bible translator. He wanted to be a linguist and study a language and be able to put the scriptures into a language. So that was exciting for us to see them get married. And then the youngest daughter too met her husband after college in Pennsylvania. So, and both of our son-in-laws are from Pennsylvania. That was kind of unique too. But it's just been a real joy to see that they were able to catch the vision and serve in this way. And so we feel very blessed that they're serving the Lord and that we get to have a part and be involved in helping them even now when we can't be out there on the front line, so to speak.
Well, let's change topics for a minute. How did you come to live at Advent Christian Village?
Well, once my husband decided that he was really going to retire after the first attempt failed, we had been researching retirement places, and somehow ACV fell under the radar. But we were on this trip visiting different places, and we came close to a friend of ours who used to work as my husband's secretary, and she lived here in the village, and she was getting up in years, and we thought we really need to stop and see her before it's too late. Excuse me. And so we came to the village and were totally blown away. We just thought she was in a little retirement place. But we came in the south entrance, and we had to drive the whole length of the village, and we're looking out the windows and so surprised at what we were seeing. And so we visited her, and we were in a hurry to get to our children in North Carolina. And we weren't going to linger, but we thought, this is kind of foolish to be right here and not take a tour. We should at least take a tour and say that, we could check it off. So we did. That was our first visit. And we made 2 visits after that.
And Jim, I understand you had an interesting plan for interviewing the village and other communities that you visited.
When we came back from Africa, not with the DC3 or from the DC3, basically because of my parents' health situation. So we got into the health cares with my parents, and then we took a leave of absence from Wycliffe, and so we thought it was just going to be a short term. Ended up being 20-some years, but my brother asked me to go into business with him. So when we got done with that, and that's when Carole said we got ready to retire for that, I had been in that business. I had been in the position of hiring people and learning how to check their references and so forth. So as we were looking for different places, we decided to ask where we were going for people there that we could interview and discuss the whole plan, how they liked it, what they didn't like about it. So I got 3 names from Karen, and then from those 3, I asked each one of those for 3 more. And then when we got theirs, that's when we came back a second and third time. I asked for 3 more from those, so we ended up with 27 people that we could talk to. So we felt we really had a pretty good handle, as much as possible, on what was going on here before we launched into that. So that was our homework and due diligence.
We didn't interview all 27.
We didn't get all the way through all 27.
And you've lived at the village how long now?
Almost 2 years.
And you've gotten involved in different parts of the activities of the village? You want to share?
Well, yeah, we have, and that's part of what our goal was. In looking for retirement centers, so many places start out with all the things that they can provide for you and what was going on. We've been in service with what the Lord had wanted us to do, and our question was, what does the Lord have for us to do now? So we were looking for places where we could actually do something rather than having it done to us, so to speak. So we've been volunteering. We give tours and been helping out with the pontoon boat. And then somebody came along and asked if I wanted to let my name stand to be on the membership association executive committee. So I said yes to that, and then come along over, wanted me to be on the board. So I said, well, I got 2 other wonderful people that are running for that, and I can let my name stand for that. But then I got I got elected that. So I'm on membership council or association as well as the board at this time, and I think that's a marvelous privilege.
Well, we appreciate your service doing that.
Thank you.
Now, I know you've had many adventures because you've talked about some of them with me, but how about something that's in your future plans? Something you haven't done and want to do? Well,
I had the privilege of taking a motorcycle trip with 4 other guys. That 2 of them left from North Carolina, and 2 of us left from Michigan, and 1 of them from Arizona. We met up in the Rockies and went to Alaska. So we had a motorcycle trip to Alaska, but Carole wasn't able to be on that trip. It was all a guide thing, so she couldn't go on that. So I've often wanted to have some kind of a trip like that where I could take her on that. So maybe won't get her to Alaska, but
not on a motorcycle.
So we would like to go. We would like to travel and see some more things. We've not been to the northeast of the United States. We've not been to the northwest. But at least I got Alaska, and so that's part of it. So we'd like to travel.
And we'd like to be able to spend some more time with our family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we just, our oldest daughter and son-in-law have just been assigned as the director of Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, and they don't have reliable electricity, and so they don't have reliable communication. Don't have a reliable internet, and sometimes water. So I have put up with the different missionary locations. I've helped with the logistics. So I may take a trip to Uganda, to Kenya, to Congo, and help them set up a battery solar system in order for them to have power. I'm looking forward to possibly doing that.
That sounds like a great future goal. I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me this afternoon, and hopefully more people in the village will get to know you and you'll be able to share more stories.
Well, thank you. We've enjoyed it, and we enjoy being here and highly recommend it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ann.
You're welcome.